Hi guys, in this video I'm going to talk through the first book on the OCD recovery's reading list, which is Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Anything, Yes Anything, by the late Albert Ellis. So this is the cover. So Albert Ellis sadly passed away in 2007, but he was one of the founders of CBT therapy. In 1955, he created rational emotive behavioural therapy, which is learning to see things in a more rational way and learning to identify the beliefs that cause our, as he put it, disturbed feelings, which are extreme unpleasant emotions such as despair, extreme sadness, furious anger, anxiety and depression. So to identify the beliefs fueling these emotions and dispute how rational they really are and look at creating a new, more rational belief which can help bring down the negative feelings, essentially. A lot of Albert Ellis's work is based around ancient philosophies around Stoicism by people such as Marcus Aurelius, and it's based on the principles that human beings create their own sufferings by their unwillingness to accept reality as it is. However, what Albert Ellis does clearly say in the introduction of this book is, he says, "Let us not confuse painful feelings with emotional disturbance. Humans distinctly feel." So what he's saying is, we are still going to feel disappointment, sadness, grief, etc. But what he's offering us here is a way to bring down the more extreme emotions that I discussed, such as anxiety, like genuine proper fear, fury, and it's these things that you're these feelings that where you can't let go of it. Throughout this book, Albert Ellis refers to scientific thinking, and by this he means whether you're thinking illogically and whether your beliefs can be proved wrong. So for example, if I had a belief that I must not ever suffer from OCD, it's completely unfair if I do, then examining how, you know, if I must not, then surely I wouldn't suffer from OCD, and I have suffered from OCD. So that straight away proves that irrational belief completely wrong. Therefore, obviously, it's always going to cause me a huge amount of emotional distress if I hold on to that. But if I change that into a desire, I would like to not suffer from OCD. I would strongly prefer to not suffer from OCD when inevitably I have done. I can feel sad and disappointed about it, but I don't have to feel depressed or furious about it. So I'm just going to read a quote from the chapter where he discusses scientific thinking a bit more. And I would also like to say, some may view the way Albert Ellis speaks as sounding a bit harsh, but he's actually, the way he words things is actually quite funny and witty, especially if you were to look him up on YouTube. He's quite a funny man to listen to. He says, "When you are neurotic, you frequently make yourself that way with illogical and unrealistic thinking. First, you are born with a talent for accepting and creating self-damaging ideas. Then you are considerably aided by your environment, which gives you real troubles and which often encourages your rigid thinking." So another thing he refers to is a way to identify an irrational belief is looking at whether it's flexible or rigid. And if it's rigid, then it's irrational, and it can be contributing to your as he puts it, as I said, emotional disturbances, which is the extreme negative emotions surrounding things. What's useful is that throughout the book, Albert gives examples of challenging various different irrational beliefs and looking at sort of it in a more scientific way. So looking at how logical it is and the benefits the benefits of letting go of that belief, and you know, the negatives of holding on to that belief. One thing he does discuss quite early on in his book is how he does not believe that having great insight into the reasons behind our emotional disturbances is particularly helpful. So despite having started off his career in psychoanalysis, he doesn't believe that psychoanalysis is necessarily helpful in helping us overcome our disturbances. It can help us identify where they might come from, but then what do you do with that? So in fact, his exact words were, "Conventional insight will help you very little, for it says that your knowledge of exactly how you got disturbed will make you less neurotic. Drivel! It will often make you become nuttier." And I think sometimes, particularly in the case of OCD, with having quite an analytical nature and no information is ever enough, this is, I can't help but agree with this with him, having gone down rabbit holes when I did some psychodynamic therapy. I have to say, certain things were useful, but it didn't necessarily, it didn't help me dig me out of my obsessions particularly. So to break it down for us, to help us understand the principles of REBT, Albert Ellis creates the ABCs of REBT. And also he refers to G, which is gold. So as humans, we have our own things that we strive towards. So he refers to this as goals. So getting what we want, especially success and approval, as he refers to it. The A is the activating events that block your goal. So it's somebody not giving you what you want, or things not going your way, you not achieving what you want to get to your goal, for example. And B stands for, so it's essentially, in this case, it's irrational beliefs, but actually B also refers to our behaviours as well. So it's our beliefs and our behaviours in a reaction to the activating event, and then the outcome of that is the C, which is the consequences. So the consequences of A and then B. So it can be feelings of anxiety and depression and self-defeating behaviours, like, for example, he gives with withdrawal and addiction. So knowing this, we can sort of, in terms of OCD, we can see, so the activating event may be the thought that crops, the obsession for us, or the trigger, the triggers that we come across that leads to more intrusive thoughts coming up. The B here would be the belief. So this is really bad, I can't stand these feelings, for example, or this is terrible if this is true. Leading to then the behaviours of a compulsion, and then this feeds into the anxiety cycle, which is the, as outlined here, this would be the equivalent of the consequences. It is important to mention here that this is not an OCD book, but you can see how it relates to OCD. And also, when we dispute our rational beliefs that are fueling our anxiety and our intrusive thoughts and our being locked onto the theme, we are disputing it in the way that you would dispute a real life event, because, you know, part of what keeps the OCD cycle is the trying to ascertain whether or not it's all true. So we don't do that anymore. We approach it as if, you know, we dispute it as if it were, essentially, you know, hypothetically, as if it were true. So later on in the book, it starts to go into a bit more detail about the language that we use when we speak, but also the language that we use in our rational beliefs. And I've done videos about this previously. Rob's done a lot, and other people have mentioned it as well. So this chapter is actually called the tyranny of shoulds. So this chapter talks about as Albert refers to, shoulding all over yourself and masturbation. So when we say, I must do this, I should do this, or for me, this must happen, it should happen. This chapter talks about how we can learn to change those beliefs within us into, I would prefer, or ideally, I would be a bit more like this. I will aim to be more like this, but I can accept it if I'm not, for example, rather than I must always get what I want. Life should always be this way. And throughout the book, he gives more guidelines on disputing our irrational beliefs. For example, if we have he's given irrational belief examples here. So if somebody had a belief that I must succeed, he asks, where is the evidence that I must succeed? Why do people have to treat me fairly? Where is it written that my life has got to be free of hassles? So it gives you some examples of how you can start picking apart these irrational beliefs. And there's another chapter in this book which it really jumped out at me. Actually, I read this book when I read it a second time. There were certain things that sunk in better for me than they did the first time. And this chapter is called You Can Refuse to Upset Yourself About Upsetting Yourself. So this talks about learning to stop layering on another layer of emotional torment on top of the original one. So for example, when I used to get anxiety about my work, I would worry too much about it. It would give me anxiety, and then it would be getting depressed about the fact that I'm always anxious about my work, for example. Or if it's in terms of OCD, if we have a slight relapse in our recovery, or we go through a bad phase, it's getting really, really down about the fact that we're anxious again, and we're anxious because we haven't quite gotten to the point where we've taken on a new rational belief. So we're still holding on to irrational beliefs, but then it's like getting really, really down about that. So this chapter goes into more detail about, practicing accepting. If you're still behaving if you're still doing compulsions or something like that, don't beat yourself up further about that. It's kind of taking away that layer, because the more layers of emotional disturbance that you put on a problem, obviously the more there is between you and actually working on the original irrational belief that you want to remove. So I think this chapter is incredibly important. I just want to show you these pages. Please excuse my notes. It's to help me remember everything I wanted to talk about in this video. But so these are forms basically with examples of where people have disputed irrational beliefs, which is really, really helpful because it kind of gives you a place to start with it. Another thing that he mentions in the book sort of later on is helping to change your beliefs, which then helps to change your thoughts and feelings by acting against your thoughts and feelings. And I really like this. So, for example, he had a fear of chatting women up, essentially. So he said that he was going to go up and chat 100 women up in one day or something. But essentially what this refers to here is exposures. It's kind of, my brain's telling me that I not to do this, so I'm going to do this. Obviously, as I sort of said before, all exposure should be, discussed with therapists or OCD coaches, and should always be completely safe and never putting yourself or anybody in danger. And so later on in the book, he also talks about once you've worked on new, more rational beliefs, it's talking to yourself more forcefully about them. So, in a way, well, of course you can get past that. I mean, you only have to listen and to watch some of Rob's videos on this channel to hear how he might be disputing it. It's with that more forceful to make yourself really believe it, because if it's only softly sort of said, then it's not necessarily taken on board by your mind. It has to be, we have to be firm with ourselves with changing these irrational beliefs, because they've been so deeply ingrained over so many years. And then towards the end of the book, Albert has a chapter about maintenance. So what he says here is achieving emotional change is not enough. Maintaining it's actually harder. So even once you start to dislodge your irrational beliefs and start to think in a more rational way, you still need to continue to work on this, because you know, human beings, as he said, by nature we're quite irrational. We're very creative in our minds, and we can create all sorts of irrational ideas, not to mention the ideas that are ingrained in us from growing up in this society. So the more, obviously, if we're engaging with other people, you know, different people's irrational ideas rub off on us. So it's about kind of, you know, keeping your toolbox sharpened, essentially, which we're taught about a lot in OCD recovery. Even once you're there, you know, it needs to be maintained, because there's not a cure for OCD. I hope this video's given you a bit of a kind of an insight into what's discussed in this book, How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Anything, Yes, Anything, by Albert Ellis. It's an absolute game changer, not just for OCD recovery, but for looking at sort of, you know, the rest of your life. When things don't go your way, it's looking at whether, is this really awful? Yeah, can I tolerate it? So it's unconditional life acceptance is the piece that this works on. And there's another book on the reading list which I will talk through in another video, which is about the myth of self-esteem, which is very much focusing on unconditional self-acceptance. But I hope this video has been useful. You can find videos with Albert Ellis, interviews also, where he talks about rational emotive behavioural therapy on YouTube. And once you've heard him speaking as well, it really helps then when you read the book, because you can really hear him kind of talking at you about it, which is good, because the book he is a witty bloke. But yeah, I hope you enjoy the book and that it's as helpful to you as it has been for me. Thank you for watching. Bye.